Back at it again with another video. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. So this is essentially part 2. So ultimately in my last video that I recorded, I discussed what a United States of Europe might look like, what might a federal system within the European continent might look like. But ultimately I want to discuss, building on that potentiality and possibility, the United States of America and the United States of Europe. What might that entail and what might that look like? What could that be? So on one hand, we got the USA over here, you got the United States, 50 states, handful of territories. You got the United States of Europe, potentially over here. Ultimately, at the moment, we have the EU and the UK over here in Europe. And then also Canada is a close ally of everybody in that sphere as well. So again, touching on Victor Hugo's quote, "A day will come when we shall see two immense groups, USA, the United States of America, and the USE, the United States of Europe, stretching out their hands across the sea, exchanging products, arts, goods, and works of genius." So, ideas. To bring about the day will not take another 400 years. And he said that, well, this was said in, article was written in 2019. So about 175 years ago. So ultimately we got about 200 more years if we want that to transpire. So ultimately what we have, potential European Federation, whether that looks like the USE, whether that looks like a more enhanced version of the EU as a whole right at the moment. So ultimately EU currently has 27 members, population about 450 million. But ultimately we're going to scooch over to this article from Visual Capitalist, a $16 trillion European Union economy. So EU economy dominated by three, but specifically the French-German duopoly of 4 trillion and close to 3 trillion in GDP output, and everyone else, making up the other half. And then ultimately the UK when it was there. So $16 trillion for the EU at the current point. The US looking at about 26 trillion. China looking at about 19 trillion. So within the current world system, world economic order, we have US at 26 trillion roughly. China's second at about 19, and then the EU as it stands at about 16.6 trillion. So what might so last video I talked a lot about Council of Europe potentially being, that federal system within Europe, whether that's the, a bigger version of the EU, whether that's, whatever version that might take. So currently the EU has about $16 trillion in economic output, but if we were to take Council of Europe altogether, we're going to scroll down all the way to the bottom. It would have a GDP of 24.3 trillion with a population of 836 million. So over 800 million people population, over $24 trillion in economic output, which would put that above China's $19 trillion currently, and would put that on par with the United States. So if the United States has roughly 26, I've seen estimates that put it at either 24 or 25 trillion. That would be, roughly 26 trillion, and then if you add in the 24.3 trillion, that is between the United States and a potential version of the United States of Europe, that could potentially add up to $50 trillion worth of GDP, which is insane to even think about, which is 50 trillion is a lot of money, a lot of money. And just having that between, just the United States and a potential USE, that would be interesting. So ultimately, as it currently stands, the EU looks like this on a map. The British left after Brexit. Iceland and Norway never joined. Switzerland has always done its own thing. Countries of the Balkan have expressed interest. Turkey, maybe. Countries of the Caucasus, maybe. Ukraine has always, said within the past year or so it wants to join the EU. Moldova has expressed interest. Belarus is essentially a puppet state of Russia at this point. So, as it stands, we have the EU at this point. But if the EU was to expand into this United States of Europe, maybe Council of Europe map looking kind of ordeal, then the EU can go from a current economy of about 16 trillion and add a couple $1 trillion more, and ultimately have Victor Hugo's speech about the USE come true, where we have one hand the USA, on one hand the USE coming together and reaching across the Atlantic and, having hundreds of millions of people, tens of trillions of dollars of global, gross domestic product output. So this concept of USA and USE is particularly fascinating because ultimately close to that coming true, but not close enough. So with that being said, that's the end of the video. That's essentially part 2. We have USA and USE potentially, fulfilling that speech from Victor Hugo over 170 or so years ago. So with that being said, that's the end of the video. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. It's awesome to kind of, express my thoughts and opinions on, interesting topics such as this. So thank you for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video. Deuces.